Hey, it's John at Tinderbox Arts. This is my wife's Can-Am Ryker Rally 900, and we bought it used, and it came with this top box of sorts on the back, which works, for around town, but for longer trips or something is just inadequate. It doesn't have enough storage. So I've purchased this Givi Monokey V40 top box. Givi is a great brand. I've used it on one of my other bikes, and I need to figure out a way to mount this to the Can-Am Ryker Rally. Now, this Ryker is equipped with a mount in the rear here. It's called the Max mount, and that is designed for that top box that I just showed you that it came with. So I need to figure out an intermediary basically to go from this mount to the Givi mount, which is a whole different system. Now, you can buy mounting plates which are designed for this, but they're quite expensive. When you add in the plate itself and the mount for the Givi system, it's about $160, which is really more than I think it's worth. So I'm going to try something different on my own here. I determined that you could buy an aluminum plate. This is 6061 alloy plate. It's 5 millimeters thick, and I got it on Amazon for about $22. And I also determined you can get a kit for the Givi mount, which includes, the appropriate hardware for mounting any Givi top box. It's called an E115F. It was only $13. So between the two of those, I think I can make something work. Now, if I turn this Givi top box upside down, I can show you how these boxes mount. On the rear here, there's a slot here and a slot here, and those kind of slide in when you're mounting this. And then in the front, I'll show you what this looks like in a second. There's this little area right here, recessed area. So there's 3 points of mounting, and then there are also some rubber pads which kind of keep the correct spacing for the top box. I'm going to show you a different bike. This is my R1200 RT, and I've had a different Givi top box mounted on here for quite some time. Now, this mount right here is a universal mount, so I could have tried to use this on the Ryker, but it's a little thicker and it's made of plastic, and it just doesn't seem right for that bike. On the BMW, it's totally hidden. I don't even notice it. But to show you how the mount works, those rear recesses slide in here and here, and then in the front, there's this little piece that sticks up right here, and that's what locks on. So you slide the box in, drop it on top of this little pyramid right here, and that's what locks it in. Givi makes some other mounts where it's the same idea, but instead of having this plastic piece right here, it just has a single bolt that sticks up, and it's the same recess. It just attaches slightly differently, and that's the route I'm going to go. Rather than having these sliding pieces of plastic right here, I'll have a single bolt that sticks up, and it is official Givi hardware. So the problems I need to solve are this. One thing I need to do is to figure out how to attach this aluminum plate to the Max mount that came with a Ryker. So that's one problem. The second problem is that I need to figure out how to use this hardware that Givi sent me and put that in the right spacing on this piece of aluminum so that I can attach the top box to the aluminum. So basically, I'm attaching the top box to the aluminum plate. The aluminum plate is attached to the Max mount, and it should all be pretty seamless once I get it done. If I just lay the Givi box on top of what's there now, I get a rough idea of where I want the placement to be. All right, I've moved to my wood shop so where I can sort all this out. So this is the hardware kit that we're looking at, and what Givi provides is, instead of plastic tabs on the back, there are these bolts with like a rubber bumper, which is the right shape to fit into the rear of the top box. So there's 2 of those, and they have to be mounted at the exact correct position, of course. One thing I noticed right away is the bolts they provide are too long for my application, so I'll need to shorten those. And this lock nut sits below the surface of the plate, and that could interfere with mounting the plate to the bike. So that's another thing I need to look at. The front looks about the same as what I showed you earlier. And they also provide you these rubber spacers. And when everything is mounted, it's going to be something in this kind of arrangement, but I got to get the spacing exactly right. And rather than risk this piece of aluminum right away, what I'm going to do is use a piece of plywood. Now, if I measure across the center to center of the rear mounts on the box itself, I get it's a light 8 7/8, okay? But rather than try to measure and transfer that measurement and maybe get it wrong, The smarter thing to do is just put the workpiece, in this case a piece of plywood, right up to where I'm going to be measuring, and I'll just mark it with a pencil so I have a mark rather than a measurement. And then I just transfer those marks down. All right, with these little bumpers mounted, now I can just make sure they fit into the back like they should. And it seems good. There's no play at all, actually. So that seems pretty good. All right, so we got the back two mounts taken care of. The front mount is a little more difficult because getting this triangle exactly right, it can be tricky. So I think what I'm going to do is just put this in here as if it would be mounted. And then I might be able to just have something like grease or a marker or anything like that so that I can put the plywood in place and then drop it down onto this mount to make a mark on the plywood. Then I can cut out the holes. So I'm going to try that. So I've got a little bit of green grease here. It won't hurt anything. And I'm just going to put it around the screw hole, not too thick. If I mount this piece of plywood, drop it on top of that grease, the grease is going to make a mark on the plywood. Let's try it. So we'll bring that rear in where it should be. It should be right about there. I think that looks good. And then I'll just drop this down. Give it a little squeeze there and make sure the grease gets in. And if I pull this up, yeah, that worked good. So I can see my holes very clearly. All right, now I'll attach this front piece. I have some shorter screws I'm using temporarily till I figure out what I need, but this will get me in the ballpark. So we'll mount this front piece and then try it on the top box. Make sure this is actually going to work. So the way this should work now is I should be able to drag it from the back to the front, and that should drop and lock in place. And it does. I think we're in good shape there. Now it's loose because remember I need those rubber spacers underneath this. I haven't done that yet. But it does seem locked in place, and I should be able to press this and pull it out, and I can. So I think our basic mounting is good. I can use this as a template now for the aluminum. But before I do that and get ahead of myself, I want to take this back over to the bike and see how we're going to mount this when it's done to the bike. All right, back in the garage here, let's see how this is going to work out. I have the attachment for the box to the plate. Now I need to attach the plate to what's here, this max mount. As I'm looking at this, one concern I had was as these bolts will hang down a little bit, will that interfere with keeping this flat on the max mount? And as it turns out, I think we're actually okay. There's a little recess right here. This part is just plastic. This part is some kind of alloy metal. So this plastic part has a little recess right here, and this area right here, when that is done, will fit in that recess no problem. I also like that because if a nut ever comes loose or a bolt ever comes loose, it can't really go too far. It'll hit the plastic and it really won't, just drop onto the tire or something. The other good thing is that these are mounted wide enough apart where they end up on the slope, so they do not interfere with the mount. So everything looks pretty good so far, and I think this is going to be mounted right around that area there. I'm going to check this. So the next question is, how do I attach this plate to the max mount? And when I look at the max mount, the alloy ends right here. There are some screws to mount the plastic to the metal that come up from the bottom. You can sort of see some marks right here. That's what those are. I need to avoid that area. And this, I would like to have 4 bolts to go through this. So I think I'm going to mount probably here and here, and maybe like here and here. But what I need to look at underneath, and I'll probably do this off camera, there's some ridges in there which would prevent a bolt from sitting flat. So I need to look at that. But in the general area of here and here, I think is where I want to be. Now with the box mounted on the plywood plate, and it's just resting in place there. I also want to look at placement of the box. I don't want it too close to the seat here because that could be annoying. On the other hand, I don't want it too far away either because the farther you put this back, the more stress you're going to put on that mount. And the other thing I can look at while I'm here, with the top box mounted like this, you can see how this plate is sticking out. Well, I obviously don't need that. It doesn't do any good. So I can use this opportunity now to mark where I might cut the plate, round it over. Certainly the corners can come off. All right, I got the holes drilled underneath in the max mount. I've marked them in the plywood. I haven't drilled the holes yet, so I know where the bolts will go. What I want to do is use a tapered head from the top so that the bolts are flush. With the plywood, that might be difficult, but with the aluminum, it won't be a problem. And now I'm just going to put that top box back on and just roughly mark in pencil where the corners might be knocked off. All right, the plywood template is all done. I got my holes drilled and I have a center line marked. I knocked off the corners on one side, and then when I mark my aluminum, I'll just flip this over end for end. That way I'll make sure I get this symmetrical. So that's basically done. The only thing left to figure out would be the bolts. So the ones they provided to me are long, so I can either cut the threads off and make them shorter, or I'll just go to the hardware store and get some alternatives. So that's really all that's left to figure out. All right, I have the basic plate done. The shape is cut. The screw holes are cut. The rubber bumpers or spacers, I'm not sure what you want to call them, that they give you would require a hole in order to stay in place. So they're meant to just kind of shove in a hole and squeeze into place. But what I suspect I'm going to do is pick a different type of spacer, a rubber spacer that might be self-stick. All right, I have just a couple bolts holding this in place. They're just finger tight and they're the wrong length, but I just want to see if this is going to work before I go too much farther. If I get the top box, what should be able to happen is I slide this into the back. You do have to line it up. And then once I feel that slide in, I should be able to just press down and it clicks in place, which it does. And it's loose now because I just had this loosely bolted, but that's going to be good, I think. I don't think any problems with that. All right, I'm making one more little piece here. I have a piece of scrap aluminum. When I put the bolts through these holes, the way they sit on the bottom of this factory mount, I'm not perfectly thrilled with. When I tighten them up a little bit tighter, there's just a little bit of rounding there and I'm not happy with it. So what I did was take a piece of scrap aluminum and I'll fit this, it's a plate, that's all it is. I'll fit this underneath here, and then when I bolt this up, the nuts will go on this side of the plate and draw this whole plate up. And there's more surface area here. I think I'll be happier the way this sits with this plate holding everything together. All right, I got my plate painted here. I'll probably do some touch up later, but the bulk of it is done now. So I can start assembling this. Now I'm going to use thread locker. If you haven't used this before, it just helps keep the threads engaged, and if they start to loosen a little bit, they won't, just spin right out. This will help keep them in place. All right, I'm attaching the plate to the bike. The paint is still curing, so I got to be very careful, but I just wanted to point out the hardware I'm using is stainless steel. You got to be careful with stainless steel because it's a softer steel and you can actually strip the threads if you really crank down on it. Remember, I'm using this plate underneath the max mount just for more surface area more than anything else. And I am using nylon lock nuts as well as the thread locker. I found a thin piece of rubber I'm going to put between the plate and the bike just for some protection for the bike more than anything else. Here's a shot underneath of that plate where I'm pointing right here. So I have the two nuts right there and the plate gives me more surface area. All right, all back together again, and I got the fender buttoned up here. I do need to let that paint cure a few more hours at least before I actually try to put the top box on there. And that leaves the last question, which is the bumpers. Remember, there's a little bit of space underneath. This is designed in underneath the box, and they gave me those rubber bumpers, which are definitely too big. So what I did was got some of these clear bumpers, which are self-stick. If these come off, no big deal. You can certainly add more on later if need be. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. I don't think there's any issue that I see here. It looks a little bit funny now because the box is not on there, but most of the time the box will be mounted, so I think this is going to work out pretty well. All right, there we are with the top box mounted. I certainly wouldn't want to go any bigger, but I think this is a good compromise. The plate hardly shows, so that worked out very well. And I may want to add side bags at some point, but for right now, this provides enough storage for what we're trying to do. I should also mention that there is an area in here on this V40 case where I could put lights, and that is something I'm interested in doing, either brake lights or turning lights or both. But I think this is a good solution, and keep in mind, any Givi case now can be mounted to that plate.